Hello, I'm Marshall Masters, publisher of Yowza.com and author of Crossing the Cusp. On February 11th of this year, I published our first video on our Object of Interest study titled Object of Interest as Seen from the Turrialba Volcano. This volcano is a stratovolcano located in Costa Rica, and we have been monitoring the object that you see since the very beginning of the year. This report concludes our studies on the Turrialba Object of Interest, which we have now designated as the Blue Kachina from Hopi prophecy. The Blue Kachina prophecy is in two parts. First part is the Blue Kachina, which is the harbinger object, and then following after that is the Red Kachina, and that's the one that brings all of the misery. Now, I realize that there are a lot of folks out there that think that the Blue Kachina was actually Comet Holmes. In October 2007, Comet Holmes had a significant outburst, and so it was momentarily the largest object in the solar system. But it was also a flash in the pan, as they say. And that brings us to why I believe what we're looking at is the actual Blue Kachina. This is because our study findings show that this object is a planet with a moon. It has a predictable orbit, and it is closing on us. Our only regret as we publish these findings is that we were not able to get a boots-on-the-ground observation at Irazu, which is a companion to Turrialba there in Costa Rica. And efforts, articles, videos, interviews with Coast to Coast, Kevin Smith's show, and many others, nobody stepped forward. For months, we had a lot of people promising to do something, but nothing ever came of it. And then someone turned us on to the Volcano Files website. The Volcano Files group is run through the Department of Geography at the University of Cambridge. And just so happens they had a team out at Turrialba in March. So I wrote to Volcano Files and I explained what we were doing at Turrialba. I knew they had been there around March 18th. We had seen their vehicles there. But I was curious to find out if they were planning to return to Turrialba or perhaps Irazu, the companion volcano to Turrialba, in which case I was asking them to look out to the west in the viewing times that we find Bluebonnet to see if they could give us a boots-on-the-ground confirmation or to let us know they didn't see anything at all. Either way, it would have been really helpful. But here is the answer we got. Hi Marshall, I'm sorry to say that we just arrived back in Cambridge from our field work in Costa Rica. We were on Turrialba doing a volcanological study some weeks ago, but we're no longer there. I can tell you that we did not observe anything unusual in the sky while we were there. My guess is that you're seeing something created by the camera's optics. I had a quick look at your website. Given that neither the volcanic plume of Turrialba nor clouds in the summit obscure the white dot you are tracking, I think it's safe to say that that white dot is in front of, rather than behind, the volcano. Best of luck, Kayla Iacovino. According to her published biography, Kayla is a lab geek and an experimental petrologist. She studies rocks and how they get formed. But with all of this science going, what was curious to me was her choice of words. My guess is, I had a quick look at your website. I think it's safe to say. Okay, so they say they were there, they didn't see anything unusual. But you know, when it comes to getting observation reports from people, there's always a scarcity of detail. Folks just don't give us all the information we really need, like exactly where were you? What direction were you looking? Time of day? And these kinds of things. But we can reconstruct for you what the Volcano Files team would have had in terms of a view to the west. And keep in mind that I was very explicit in my letter to that department, telling them that they had to look to the west at a certain time of day. You might find this interesting. What you see here is a view during the day when they were there at Turrialba. And as you can see in the upper right-hand illustration, there's just one big road leading around the whole thing. And that structure that you see over to the left-hand side is where the science research is typically done. And when we spotted the volcanophiles vehicles, they were actually a little below that, down in that area. Why are they there? Well, this is a night infrared exposure, and you can see that hot spot there. That's an active vent. It's the Big Shoe at Turrialba. So there they are. And they're looking out where? To the west? Do you see much of a view to the west? Perhaps you could look up in a westerly direction, but you certainly cannot look west. And yet, not being able to look out to the west in the afternoons to observe Bluebonnet, she assures us, "I can tell you that we did not observe anything unusual in the sky while we were there." And the only way she can explain that is, "My guess is you're seeing something created by the camera's optics." There are those that would say that Kayla's answer was condescending or patronizing. I didn't see it that way. I saw it as conflicted and really representative of what I see 99.99% of the time. It's because this is a really a bad news topic. When you're talking to somebody about the possibility of a large object coming through the system, well, what it does is triggers a genetic engram, something built right into each one of us. And when that engram is triggered, how do we respond? Go away, go away, go away, go away. That's how we do it. We just go and lock the closet door, crawl into bed, and pull the covers directly over our heads, because if the monsters can't see us and we can't see the monsters, they can't get us. That's really what Kayla's dealing with. And she's just as ordinary as the other 99.999% of the world. So, what am I seeing with this object? Not just glancing at a website. What am I really seeing? Well, we're looking for three things in particular. What we're looking for are movement, persistence, and foreground illumination. So let's take a look at those. The green arrow pointing down in the middle is pointing out our object of interest, and the one pointing up at the bottom is at a known reflection we call Yogi. Now, watch as they are closing. What we see is that our object of interest, the Blue Kachina, does not move like a reflection. Next up is a persistence study, and here you can see that the object is moving down to the horizon very nicely, as it always does. But focus on the last frame in this sequence, and you can see while all the other reflections are gone, our object remains. Well, the movement and persistence studies are compelling, but I think the one that really makes it for me is what I call foreground illumination. Now, the biggest debunking knockoff is that this object is in front of the clouds. Well, we've got it in front of clouds, we've got it behind clouds, and everywhere in between. It's like getting eggs at Denny, sunny side up, easy over, omelet. What do you want? We'll make it your way. We have hundreds and hundreds of pictures in every different possible configuration. But when we get down to the camera sensors, this is where foreground illumination really becomes interesting. And I want to begin by calling your attention to a great page put up by Andrew T. Young over at the San Diego State University in San Diego, California. And this professor's page has a really, really good discussion of sunset photography. And that's what we're talking about here, because we're always seeing our object in Turrialba close to sunset. Now, here you see a close-up of the image from his webpage, and we have in the inset on the left-hand side a sensor analysis blow-up, so you can actually see the sensor pattern from the camera. Now, keep that in mind, because we addressed this in our first update back in late February of this year, at which point we were really explaining to people that when you're thinking of a CCD, think of a video wall. because that's really how it works. Now, here in this close-up, which you can download from our site at yowza.com, you can see where we have called attention to a close-up of a CCD sensors. Yeah, it doesn't look like film, does it? And then let's look over here at Bluebonnet. Now, Bluebonnet itself is bright, and that's fine and fairly well defined. But of more importance to us is the foreground, because the clouds are in between the camera and Bluebonnet. It's why there's more cloud detail in the foreground. And if you look over here to the far right-hand side, what do you see? You don't see the same level of foreground illumination. So when we compare the two, reflected images, whether it's from the website from that fellow in San Diego or our own, really do look about the same. Now, I do want to call your attention to that one little spot over there on the right-hand side. Just tuck that away. We're going to come back to that later because it's really, really interesting. So with that in mind, let's take a look at this really great sensor analysis that our new team member Jack did. And when you're looking at it, do not focus on the bright object itself. And yes, it is brighter than typical reflections, but look around it. Look at what is happening in the foreground to the clouds in between the object and the surveillance camera there at Turrialba. And to help things go along, I've added a little bit of Bing Crosby. So, in terms of movement, persistence, and foreground illumination, there's a strong case for this being a natural object. But if it is a natural object, then we have to ask the old question. You can talk the talk, but can you walk the walk? In other words, do you move through space like a natural object? Now, here we need to understand something very clearly. This object is not orbiting our sun. Rather, it is orbiting some other object which in turn is orbiting our sun. But when looking at it through the Volcan feed from Turrialba, what you have to keep in mind is that you never should confuse the horizon with what is called the ecliptic. Now, I covered that quite extensively in my first video, and you can go back and look at that. But simply put, the ecliptic is the plane of our system. You start at a center of the sun and take a concentric ring and expand it all the way out to the 12 constellations of the zodiac, and there you go. But it is not fixed on the horizon like what we normally want to do. So what I've done is created something for you so that you can see where the ecliptic is and how it moves in relationship to the horizon. And this is important because one of the number one debunkerings we have from people is that, well, it's off to the left, but now it's on to the right. It was under this number, but now it's under that letter, and they go on with these horizon analyses that are completely irrelevant. And you're going to see why in this video I've done. In the inset, what you see is a screen capture that I took from my Starry Night program. I want to call your attention to the line at the bottom of that insert, which is the horizon, and that is parallel with the horizon at Turrialba. However, the green line moving vertically is the ecliptic, and when you are trying to determine the exact location of this object, you have to use the ecliptic and not the horizon. So let's fire it up and see what that movement looks like. As you can see, the ecliptic is a moving target. It's constantly going back and forth. You know, it kind of reminds me of a windshield wiper. Now, keeping in mind how the ecliptic moves through the sky from the viewpoint of the Volcan feed at Turrialba, let's take a look at 2012 and then 2013 to see how our object, which I call Bluebonnet, tracks with the ecliptic. I think you'll find it interesting. We first find Bluebonnet in May 16th, 2012. Moves south and then turns right around and starts heading north again. And it's quite an interesting track. Next up is 2013, and unlike the 2012, which we actually obtained from an Air Force Academy in Alaska, all of the 2013 images were captured by the team, and lead on that is Barbara, and she is uncannily good. She kind of reminds me of that Chronicles of Riddick movie where the lensman looking for the underverse or whatever, nothing gets past him. Whew, she's got quite an eye. So let's take a look at 2013. Our first image is of the 6th of January of this year, and as you can see, Bluebonnet is just moving south all the time. Now to make it interesting, let's combine 2012 and 2013 to see what we get. Here we have our 2012 plot. And let's add 2013 to it, and what you see is in 2013, Bluebonnet is moving away from behind the sun. However, when you flip the 2 years around, what you get is something that looks like this figure 8 pattern. Now, I am completely certain somebody out there has got to be saying something like, "Well, it seems perfectly logical to me that..." I love it when folks start with that one. And then they proceed to talk about how it's impossible for this object to have this figure 8 pattern, or a corkscrew, if you will, going through space. But what you have to remember, again, is this object is orbiting another object, which in turn is orbiting our sun. And what we also see is it is moving out from behind the sun as well. Now, to help put that kind of a corkscrew pattern in mind, here's a tremendous video graphic from a YouTuber I think really puts it in context. Call it a corkscrew or whatever you want. This is how it moves through space. So, just keep in mind, this apparent corkscrew pattern is just an optical illusion that's created by flipping 2012 and 2013 so that we complete a pattern. And now that question becomes, is the pattern consistent with elliptical orbit? And I think you'll find it is. And I'm going to explain some of the very simple basics here, and well, you decide for yourself. For the purpose of this program, an elliptical orbit is the oval-shaped path of a celestial body. Now, that orbit is defined by a major axis. It's the longest one. And you have a minor axis, the shorter one that cuts across the center, if you will. And then you have the foci. You have a focus on one end and a focus on another. In this case here, the focus is going to be on one end or the other. There's only going to be one because that is what Bluebonnet is actually orbiting around. So now let's return to our illustration of the ecliptic, and here we see our elliptical orbit shown, and now we're going to bring in our 2012-2013 reversed orbit, and what do you know? We have a match. It's an elliptical orbit. So now we have our candidate for an elliptical orbit. Interesting question now is, are there any current predictions out there on the internet that might work with this particular orbit? Well, could be, and it comes from none other than Project Camelot. In October 2012, Carrie Cassidy of Project Camelot did an interview with a super secret source trusted to her, and I think this is the kind of stuff Carrie's been doing for years, and she does it brilliantly well. But what really got my attention was this one comment. We will be on the other side of the sun when Nibiru pivots. Mars will be between her, Nibiru, and the sun. I thought this was such an interesting prediction that just for curiosity's sake, I ran a rough comparison, if you will, between the orbit we have for Bluebonnet for 2012 and 2013 against this prediction by Carrie Cassidy's super secret source. This is interesting. Here we see Mars in conjunction with Earth as the two dance around the sun, if you will. Well, Karen Cassidy's prediction vis-a-vis her super secret source is interesting, but I'll tell you the one that just simply stunned us came from the 00 Sky View on YouTube. Now, this is a somewhat mysterious group of extremely well-equipped amateur astronomers with the necessary infrared equipment to track what we call the Red Kachina. Now, it's the second object of the Hopi prophecy, and where Blue Kachina is a harbinger, and it causes a little bit of grief, the guacamole hits the fan when the Red Kachina comes around. So with that in mind, let's take a look at a recent video they posted and something that caught our attention in that video. On 23 March 2013, this group uploaded a video to YouTube called the 5 Uploaded Images from the Dance of the Stars video. And now we see them doing what we do. They're putting the pieces of their puzzle together. And here's what they're finding that caught our undivided attention. If you look, you'll see on the right-hand side potential orbitals. And guess what? Those potential orbitals happen to be in the same neck of the woods as Bluebonnet. In our group, we discussed it, and a new member, William, really took this to heart and decided to go look for the orbitals. Remember, it's plural, just not orbital, orbitals. Well, he found something. You see, in 2010 and 2012, where we have imagery from other sources on Bluebonnet, there was never enough resolution in 2010 to make a determination if there was something else out there, a companion to Bluebonnet. But in 2012, had all the resolution that we needed, exactly what we get in 2013. But we couldn't find a pattern there. However, when William started looking through our database of 2013 images, bingo, he hit pay dirt. And now I am going to show you what he found. And it's inside that reflection. Remember back at the beginning of the program, I said, hey, keep this in mind when we were looking at the sensor analysis. Well, now you're going to know why. Why? What William found is a clear orbital pattern of a moon around Bluebonnet in 2013. But not only do we have the discovery of a moon in orbit around Bluebonnet, because we could only find it in the most recent database images, it's further verification that this object is closing with us. Now, keeping all of this in mind, I must again restate that we were unable to get a boots-on-the-ground observation from an independent party. It would have been nice if Cambridge had come crashing through with us on something that would have been honest and useful. No, that's not going to happen. And I don't begrudge them that, because, frankly, it doesn't matter whether the object is real or is a ghost. Either way, nobody, and I mean nobody, is going to believe this until they see it with their own eyes. And not just once, but for a period of several days. So what we have now is an interesting threat profile that those of you familiar with risk management understand. You look at this and you decide, okay, does this information rise to a threshold that I should do preparation and planning? And for those of you who do, our hats off to you. You're doing the right thing. But for those of you who may have found this video when, well, unfortunately, it is happening on your watch, and you are seeing this with your own eyes, standing out on your front yard along with your neighbors, pointing up the sky and pooping your collective pants, and realizing that you're naked because you're unprepared. What I want to say to you is that if you do that, you're going to waste time and you're going to waste life. Yes, there's ignorance here, and it's intentional because it's Titanic rules. Elites get the boats, steerage goes down with the ship. Where's steerage? But on the other hand, if you wouldn't believe it until you saw it with your own two eyes, your hands are dirty too. So the point here is do not waste time on hand-wringing and who shot John about what did the government know and when did they know it. Don't do that. Accept responsibility for your own human failing. Put all of this behind you. Focus, focus, focus. Get in the moment. What do you need to do to survive? Assuming that's what you want to do. With that in mind, if it does happen on your watch, well, what could it look like? What could we see coming down the road? And here I want to turn to a prediction made a long time ago by Major Ed Dames. He's a remote viewer, and I deeply respect the man's work and his integrity. So let's watch a little clip from a video he put out last year, long before things started flaring up with Korea.
Preceding events that lead up, that we can see, are dominoes that lead up to the beginning of this kill shot sequence.
Many of these preceding events have already come to pass, including the shot across the bow, the killer crop fungus, and the Japanese disaster. But what else do viewers foresee coming over the horizon?
We picked up the use of the nuclear weapon on the Korean Peninsula by the North Koreans, and this event would be one of the last events that humans recognize before the kill shot sequence begins. We haven't seen that yet.
This prediction was revealed years ago to the public on the Coast to Coast AM radio show. At the time, the nation had zero nuclear capability, and the notion that they would use a nuclear weapon as an act of war was widely believed to be absurd.
The kill shot that Major Dames is talking about is a solar storm that really scorches the earth. This storm has been predicted in the Holy Bible, but also it has been predicted and described from previous flybys in the Colburn Bible. And so to give you a really good idea of what the ancient Egyptians tell us to expect on this coming flyby of the Red Kachina, if you will, I'm going to turn to the Book of Manuscripts and read a couple of passages to you. Here we go. When blood drops upon the earth, the destroyer will appear, and mountains will open up and belch forth fire and ashes. Trees will be destroyed and all living things engulfed. Waters will be swallowed up by the land, and seas will boil. Be alert and strong, my children. Be ready for the day of the next visitation, when doom reaches down from the skies, and man is blasted with irresistible power. In closing, I want to say to everyone who's watched this video, it has always been my belief that while these events will end life as we know it, it will not be the end of us. We will persevere. The meek shall inherit the earth. And I'll leave it on that note. So until the next time we meet, remember Marshall's motto, destiny comes to those who listen and fate finds the rest. So, learn what you can learn, do what you can do, and never give up hope. This is Marshall, and I'll catch you on the backside. Hello, I'm Marshall Masters, publisher of Yowza.com and author of Crossing the Cusp. On February 11th of this year, I published our first video on our Object of Interest study titled Object of Interest as Seen from the Turrialba Volcano. This volcano is a stratovolcano located in Costa Rica, and we have been monitoring the object that you see since the very beginning of the year. This report concludes our studies on the Turrialba Object of Interest, which we have now designated as the Blue Kachina from Hopi Prophecy. The Blue Kachina prophecy is in two parts. First part is the Blue Kachina, which is the harbinger object, and then following after that is the Red Kachina, and that's the one that brings all of the misery. Now, I realize that there are a lot of folks out there that think that the Blue Kachina was actually Comet Holmes. In October 2007, Comet Holmes had a significant outburst, and so it was momentarily the largest object in the solar system. But it was also a flash in the pan, as they say. And that brings us to why I believe what we're looking at is the actual Blue Kachina. This is because our study findings show that this object is a planet with a moon. It has a predictable orbit, and it is closing on us. Our only regret as we publish these findings is that we were not able to get a boots-on-the-ground observation at Irazu, which is a companion to Turrialba there in Costa Rica. And efforts, articles, videos, interviews with Coast to Coast, Kevin Smith's show, and many others, nobody stepped forward. For months, we had a lot of people promising to do something, but nothing ever came of it. And then someone turned us on to the Volcano Files website. The Volcano Files group is run through the Department of Geography at the University of Cambridge. And just so happens they had a team out at Turrialba in March. So I wrote to Volcano Files and I explained what we were doing at Turrialba. I knew they had been there around March 18th. We had seen their vehicles there. But I was curious to find out if they were planning to return to Turrialba or perhaps Irazu, the companion volcano to Turrialba, in which case I was asking them to look out to the west in the viewing times that we find Bluebonnet to see if they could give us a boots-on-the-ground confirmation or to let us know they didn't see anything at all. Either way, it would have been really helpful. But here is the answer we got. Hi, Marshall. I'm sorry to say that we just arrived back in Cambridge from our field work in Costa Rica. We were on Turrialba doing a volcanological study some weeks ago, but we're no longer there. I can tell you that we did not observe anything unusual in the sky while we were there. My guess is that you're seeing something created by the camera's optics. I had a quick look at your website. Given that neither the volcanic plume of Turrialba nor clouds in the summit obscure the white dot you are tracking, I think it's safe to say that that white dot is in front of, rather than behind, the volcano. Best of luck, Kayla Iacovino. According to her published biography, Kayla is a lab geek and an experimental petrologist. She studies rocks and how they get formed. But with all of this science going, what was curious to me was her choice of words. My guess is, I had a quick look at your website.